All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we try to check out great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, and also explosive findings, earth-shattering discoveries, mostly just stuff that you probably never heard of before. But if you did, it would change your life and have a big impact. And we've been doing a lot of Bible decodes. I believe today is number 174. These are all coming from the New Testament. We'll be getting to the Old Testament eventually. But we've been exploring in the ins and outs of the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament, that the New Testament was written in whole or in part by the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty, that is Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian, from 69 until 96 AD. The theory goes that they wrote the story of the Gospels, the first three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they backdated the stories by 40 years or so. In the case of Matthew and Luke, maybe even closer to 50 years. And then they also wrote a history of the war between the Jews and the Romans that occurred from 66 until 73 AD. Titus and Vespasian were the two major military commanders in that war for the Romans. They both were also wounded in the war. And their basic motive, even though Titus had utterly destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, it took the Romans 7 years to, to finally subdue the Jews. And they knew that even though they utterly decimated the Jews, that the Jews would be back, because the Jews had been revolting and uprising and revoluting and warring against the Romans ever since the Romans pulled into Judea in 63 BC. So for over 125 years, this had been a common thing. And so their motive was to, mellow out the Jews, to pacify the Jews, to tame or domesticate or prune the Jews, and really even to place themselves, the Romans, the Caesars, place themselves at the end point of the Jewish lineage. And so they really were trying to replace the Jewish religion with their own. And so this history of the war between the Jews and the Romans is called War of the Jews, or Jewish War, written under the name of Josephus. Josephus is known by Christians because he's the only non-gospel source or non-New Testament source to corroborate the existence of Jesus in the first century. Josephus, though, doesn't count if you are taking the Roman origins hypothesis, because Josephus is known as Flavius Josephus. He is a member of the Roman royal family. And so, of course, he would say that the Romans, sorry about this. Of course he would say that the Romans, or that Jesus existed, because he's one of the Romans, he's in on it. It's a psychological operation that was used to great effect by the Romans to mellow out the Jews, and eventually to be used also on Gentiles. And if you read War of the Jews in 7 volumes from Josephus, you will see that whoever it was that wrote Josephus, whether he really existed or he was just a pseudonym of the Flavian dynasty, whoever it was, that same entity also wrote the New Testament, because the parallels between the two sources are uncanny, beyond uncanny, to basically blatant parallels between the two. One example of many that was discovered by Joseph Atwill in his book Caesar's Messiah, which came out about 20 years ago, was that the 3-year ministry of Jesus in Judea is just a copy of the 3-year military campaign of Titus in Judea. Jesus' campaign starts in 30 AD. Titus's starts in 70 AD. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus also goes, in the same order. And every place that they go, they encounter an event, a challenge, a battle, or something, and Jesus encounters a parallel event. Like, not the same, but typologically the same event at each location. And each event occurs exactly 40 years from the time of Titus's event. So, and this is not just a couple of episodes. This is over 40 episodes that are all in the same order in the book of Luke as they are in Josephus. But there are many other sets of parallels as well. Everything that Jesus predicts or prophesies will come true in the New Testament is fulfilled in the pages of War of the Jews. And most of the time, the prophecy is fulfilled by Titus, which sets up Jesus as a great prophet. But it also sets up Titus as the second coming of Jesus, which was recognized in the ancient times when people actually read Josephus. Now they just cite him. Oh, well, Josephus corroborated the existence of Jesus. Yeah, well, if you read it, though, it's very strong evidence against the existence of Jesus, because the parallels make it such that it's obvious that whoever wrote one wrote the other at the same time for the same reason, the same people. And if we know that Josephus was written by the Romans, then guess who wrote the New Testament? And then you look and you see that they had a very clear motive for doing so. This is exactly what they would do. It is right down the alley of their MO. They created a number of other religions in the first century, including one that was almost identical except for the group of Jews that it was focused after. This would be what you would call the rabbinical school or rabbinical Judaism. The Flavians sponsored a campus, a land grant for this campus for the study of the Torah and the breaking down of everything in the Torah, while shying away from more political issues. And the Romans knew that the Jews were waiting for a Messiah. But the Messiah they were waiting for was a military commander that would help them overthrow the Romans. And in 66 AD, there were a number of candidates for that Messiah that rose up and kicked out the Herods, the puppet kings of Jerusalem, which caused Emperor Nero to send in General Vespasian. And so it literally happened. The fulfillment of the prophecies of the Old Testament came to fruition, albeit briefly. And so this also is going to prompt the Romans to instead write about a Jewish Messiah who instead was a Prince of Peace, and who believed in turning the other cheek to oppression and rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack. At the same time, overthrowing the temple of the tables of the money changers outside the Jewish temple and disrupting the Jewish, rituals, as well as, disrupting the commerce of the Jewish entrepreneurs who are out there, selling small animals for the sacrifice inside the temple. Again, taking a direct hit at the Jewish rituals while being utterly deferential to Rome. And then you'll find that Paul is even worse. And so this is exactly what the Romans would have written had they written something. Not only that, but the Romans had a monopoly on publishing, on censorship, on distribution. They were really the only people who could have written the Gospels in the quantities that they were allegedly written. And the Gospels are written in Greek, which is the language of Rome. Along with Latin. Latin was more of an elite language, but Greek was much more rare in Judea. And then we get to the work of Michael Menescotz, Menasgotz, in his Christianity's Origin as a Flavian secrecy cult. He goes into the book of Luke as well, looking for parallels with War of the Jews. He found over 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. And some of them are very impressive in terms of the level of detail and the amount of thought that went into it, into hiding it, and just, some of them are also banal and could easily be dismissed as coincidental. But because there are over 250 of them, it's pretty hard to dismiss any of them when you actually see all of them together. But not only that, Menescotz graphs them on a chart. So he puts the book of Luke on the vertical axis, and he puts War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. He puts a dot wherever there is a correspondence. After plotting all 250 plus points, he has created 5 near perfect letters in Latin, meaning that not only did the Romans write the New Testament, but they literally put their initials on it. They signed it. So that one day somebody would discover this. And more and more people are discovering that no matter how much we want to pretend that Jesus is a real historical figure, which he might be, but that the story as it is written in the New Testament is fiction. It may be based on some real story, but doubtful that would be true about all of the miraculous stuff, just if you go by Occam's razor. But, so what we're doing, this is, I think, the 5th day of doing it, is going over this book of Christian apologetics from Lee Strobel called The Case for Christ. Strobel was a court reporter, and he went around the country interviewing various Bible scholars, apologists, and trying to make the case for Christ. The main point, he's got the case for the resurrection and the case for miracles and all, I think a few dozen the case for books. But this was his first one, I believe. And this is the book that you will get if you are not a Christian and you have a Christian friend who wants to convert you. They will get you this book, The Case for Christ. But what's funny about this book is the people that write about it have either total ignorance of or are pretending that they have total ignorance of the Roman origins hypothesis. And so in the long run, they make the case for Christ, but they actually make the case better for Caesar. The arguments that they use are a lot of times arguments like, oh, well, there's just no other explanation. So God did it. Or, so the virgin birth, so the crucifixion, so the resurrection. But if you have the Roman origins hypothesis, then you do know that there is another explanation. And it's quite logical, reasonable, fits the motive, method, opportunity, and, really everything. It just doesn't really have too many holes in it. The main holes that I see are that Josephus is written in Greek, and so are the Gospels, but they are written in a slightly different form of Greek. Maybe like a different dialect of Greek. From what I hear, I don't read Greek. Not much, anyway. And then the other question is, well, how do the Dead Sea Scrolls fit into this? And it appears pretty clearly that whoever wrote the New Testament and whoever wrote Josephus both had seen much of the content of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls may actually be the real story of the historical Jesus, and the Romans somehow, probably with the help of the Herods, they read these ancient Hebrew texts. Hebrew, and a few of them are in Aramaic. I think there's a couple of them even in Greek. But they use that as kind of the script that they extrapolated off of. Hard to say, though. But anyway, let's get into this Lee Strobel and see where we go. So he's talking to one of these scholars. I think it's Yamauchi. And, one of the points that they like to make is they like to compare with other religions and other ancient documents and show how Christianity is so much better than this, which is not an argument for its existence. It may be like, so right here they're talking about the Quran, and they're criticizing that Muhammad's biography was not written until 767, which was over 100, almost 145 years after his death. And so by that time, all kinds of legends there's obviously no eyewitnesses or anything like that. But with the Gospels, the same is basically true. It's just not 140 years. It's 40 years or 50 years or 60 years. So, yeah, it's better, but that doesn't mean that it's good. I mean, it's still a huge red flag that there's nothing that was written in the first 40 or 50 years after the Gospels. Now, they say that Paul was written at that time. I don't really buy that, and hopefully we'll get to that here. But he says Jesus is unique and quite impressive in terms of how much we can learn about him aside from the New Testament. Now, given the Roman origins hypothesis, I challenge anybody to give me any evidence aside from the New Testament that teaches you anything about Jesus, because all of the sources that are aside from the New Testament are Romans. They're all from the Roman Caesars, whether it's Josephus, whether it's Tacitus, whether it's Pliny the Younger, whether it's Trajan. They're all Suetonius. They're all Roman royalty. And so they're all in on it. Okay, and many of them are writing with pseudonyms, a lot of other things too, including the Church Fathers and the Apocrypha, were all done by the Romans because they had a monopoly on publishing, on censorship, and on distribution. Nothing that was going to be published in the first century was going to be published by anybody other than the Romans. Okay, he's saying Paul at this very early date was worshiping Jesus as a god. This is total speculation, but he's basically, using the fact that Paul was assassinated or executed in 62 AD, and so all of his stuff must be from earlier than that, but they go to the book of Acts and see that Paul visited with the apostles, and they're putting that date as way back in the 30s, just a couple of years after the so-called crucifixion. It makes them sound really very much like children, because they don't know anything about the Roman origins hypothesis. So it makes it's almost like they're telling you as 5-year-olds in the existence of Santa Claus, and they're giving you Santa Claus, the legend of Santa Claus is much more believable than the legend of the Tooth Fairy. So therefore, that's a point in the favor of the legend of Santa Claus. And then they say, the elves were there, and they were worshiping Santa before they even joined up with him, or at a very early stage. So this guy Gary Habermas details a total of 39 ancient sources documenting the life of Jesus. I'm going to get my hands on that book and go over all 39 of those. I bet you that they are all Romans. Or they could also be the Church Fathers. But these, documenting the life of Jesus, if you're doing that in the year 250, like Origen or something like that, why should that move the needle for me whatsoever if it's 2 centuries later? I can't even see why it should move the needle at all if it's 50 years later. So anyway, from which he enumerates more than 100 reported facts concerning Jesus' life, teachings, crucifixion, and resurrection. So each one of these 39 sources has approximately 2.5 tidbits. and that's what this all is. It's all cherry picking. They are picking out the little tidbits that fit the story of Jesus. But in many of the cases, the Romans, like, this is what they did with a lot of the Old Testament books. They just inserted like a sentence or two in strategic places that, gave a prophecy that Jesus would eventually exist, or, wrote in something that refers to a story that Josephus tells in his War of the Jews. That's what is called historicizing. So the Romans did a lot of historicizing of the sources that they had forged, or the propaganda that they had put out. This is I'm getting those ideas from Abelard Reuchlin and Roman Piso, who are both scholars in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, and they read the original letters that were written between many of the Roman royals, like Pliny the Younger, Pliny the Elder, Seneca the Younger, Aries Piso, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Younger. I think I said that. But they write back and forth with each other, and they write in a kind of a code that reveals the various pseudonyms that they use to write with. So, Aries Piso wrote under the name of Josephus, is what they say. Both of them independently determined that the New Testament was written by Aries Piso and his family. Aries Piso was a kind of a shadow character within the court of the Flavians. The Pisos were one of the most powerful families, and he was a close relative to Vespasian and Titus. The general consensus of both liberal and conservative scholars is that Luke is very accurate as a historian, McCrae replied. He's erudite, he's eloquent. His Greek approaches classical quality. There again is another red flag. What is this guy Luke doing with this very erudite and classical level of Greek? And now Luke is supposed to have been the doctor of Paul. And so he was writing down a lot of the ideas of Paul. Now, Paul never met Jesus while Jesus was alive. But if you, again, read Luke and you read Michael Menescott's Christianity's Origins, you will see that there are over 250 parallels in the book of Luke to the book War of the Jews. Now, and it's obvious that it's mutual. Sometimes the New Testament is poking fun at Josephus, and sometimes Josephus is poking fun at the New Testament. They go back and forth. So now he's talking about a archaeological discovery that was accurate. Gaius Vibius Maximus, prefect of Egypt, and now he talks about the census of 6 BC, I believe it was, and that is the one that caused Joseph to pick up with his 9-month pregnant wife and take them all to Egypt to go pay the tax. I think the trip to Egypt, that's like it's like a 2-week walk or something like that through the desert with your 9 months pregnant wife, which is also prior to the date that is even assigned for the birth of Jesus. But also, this Gaius Vibius Maximus. Maximus was identified by Roman Piso as one of the names used for the pseudonyms of Roman Piso, of Arius Piso. So, but he uses that, this McCrae guy, uses that as evidence for that practice is confirmed by this document, that practice of taxation and causing everybody to go away from their home to go pay the tax. Okay, papyri expert Jose O'Callahan said one Dead Sea fragment is part of the earliest manuscript ever found of the Gospel of Mark, dating back to a mere 17 to 20 years after Jesus was crucified. However, many scholars continue to be skeptical of this interpretation. Yeah, well, if you saw what it was that's left of the Gospel of Mark here, I don't believe there's even one full word that is intact. It is a tiny little fragment that's got a few partial words on it. He didn't mention that though. Instead of directly saying yes or no, Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, and those who have leprosy are cured. The deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor." That's Matthew 11:4. And Jesus' response was an allusion to Isaiah 61. Now, Isaiah 61 is, I believe, everything after Isaiah has 66 verses. I think everything after Isaiah 54 is what Roman Piso says is written by the Romans. And there are, scholars do say that there are 3 versions of Isaiah. I think like the first 46 verses are the first Isaiah, and then the second Isaiah is the next 8 verses, and then the next 12 verses are the third Isaiah. So